I had a secret affair with my younger brother, a real infidelity story. Before we get into this story, let me just say that life often takes unexpected turns. Sometimes, the people who enter your life don't conform to society's expectations, and other times, you find yourself overwhelmed by emotions you never anticipated. That's exactly what happened to me. Looking back now, I can't say I'm proud of it, but it undeniably shaped the person I am today. I wasn't ready for how one choice could unravel into a series of secrets, bewilderment, and guilt. To complicate matters even further, it involved someone I could never openly acknowledge my feelings for, my younger brother. Allow me to clarify before you make any judgments. I was raised in a family that wasn't exactly close-knit. We were polite with each other, but there wasn't much warmth. My younger brother Jonathan is 5 years younger than me. For the majority of my life, we lived in entirely different worlds. I was wrapped up in high school, while he was still enjoying cartoons. By the time I headed off to college, he was entering his awkward teenage years, but after I came home from graduation, things began to change. Jonathan wasn't the shy, awkward kid I remembered. He had grown into someone completely different. No longer just my little brother, he was now smart, thoughtful, and unexpectedly attractive. At first, I thought I was imagining it. How could I feel this way about someone I had practically helped raise? But the feeling was there, undeniable and impossible to ignore. One evening, we were sitting in the backyard beneath the stars, simply talking. It began harmlessly, reminiscing about childhood memories and playfully teasing each other about the silly things we used to do. But then he said something that made me freeze. "You know, I've always admired you," Jonathan said quietly, "but lately I feel like I see you differently." I was at a loss for words. My heart was pounding, but not in the way it should have been. I let out a nervous laugh and tried to steer the conversation elsewhere, yet his words hung heavily in the air between us. That moment marked the beginning. What Jonathan said that night seemed innocent enough, but it opened a door I couldn't seem to shut. Over the following weeks, everything became more complex, and I started to notice feelings I had no right to feel. Following that unforgettable night spent under the stars, I attempted to persuade myself that Jonathan's words held no real significance, that he was merely being sentimental, or perhaps even a bit awkward in his expression. However, deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that he looked at me as if I were more than just his big sister. I threw myself into the busyness of life, applying for jobs, spending time with friends, and engaging in various activities to keep my mind occupied and distracted. Yet, despite my efforts, Jonathan always seemed to find a way to be near me. He would stop by my room to chat about his day, linger in the kitchen while I prepared meals, and sit just a little too close to me when we watched TV together, and for some reason, I allowed him to do that. At first, I reassured myself that I was simply overthinking the situation. Families are meant to be close, right? But this felt like more than just familial closeness. It was a palpable tension, an unspoken, silent pull between us that I was far too scared to acknowledge, yet far too weak to avoid. Each moment spent together only intensified the feeling, leaving me in a state of confusion and longing that I couldn't quite understand. The tipping moment came on a rainy Sunday afternoon that seemed to stretch on forever. It had been pouring relentlessly all day, leaving us both stuck indoors, feeling bored and restless. In an attempt to lighten the mood, Jonathan suggested we play a card game, just like we used to do when we were kids. "You've got no chance against me," I teased, trying to keep the atmosphere playful and carefree. "We'll see about that," he shot back with a mischievous grin that made my heart flutter. As we played, the jokes and laughter began to take on a different tone, one that felt charged, with an unspoken tension. Every time his hand brushed against mine as he passed me the cards, it felt intentional, almost electric. Each glance we exchanged lingered just a little too long, making the air between us thick with something I couldn't quite name. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and it wasn't just because of the competitive spirit of the game we were playing. The realization that this moment was shifting into something deeper left me both exhilarated and anxious. At one moment, I reached across the table to grab the deck, and our hands brushed. It was such a fleeting touch, but it felt like a spark of electricity. I froze, and so did he. Our eyes met, and for a brief second, it felt as though time itself had stopped. "You feel it too, don't you?" he asked softly. I was at a loss for words. Denying it felt dishonest, but admitting it, that would change everything. "I don't know what you mean," I murmured, quickly pulling my hand back and standing up. But Jonathan wasn't ready to let it go. He followed me into the living room, his expression intense. "Don't do that," he said firmly. "Don't act like this isn't real." "It's wrong," I blurted out. "We can't. This isn't. We're not supposed to feel this way." "Why not?" he countered. "I know what we're expected to be, but I can't ignore how I feel, and I don't think you can either." I had no response. All I knew was that I felt torn in two, and no matter which path I chose, someone would end up hurt. I told Jonathan that we couldn't talk about it anymore, that by that point the damage had already been done. The boundaries between us had become blurred, and no matter how hard I tried to push those feelings away, I couldn't undo what I felt deep inside. After that confrontation, the dynamic between Jonathan and me grew increasingly complex. We never directly addressed what had transpired, but the tension was always present, simmering just beneath the surface of our interactions. Every glance we exchanged, every word spoken, and every moment spent together felt charged with unspoken energy, as if we were dancing around an issue that we both knew existed, but couldn't quite name. I made an effort to act as if everything was normal, but the truth was that normalcy no longer existed for me. Spending too much time with Jonathan made me feel like I was tiptoeing on a fragile tightrope, always on the verge of a dangerous fall at any moment. Conversely, if I chose to avoid him, it felt as though I was tearing a part of my own self away, leaving a painful void. What made matters even more difficult was that he wasn't making it easy for me to maintain my distance. Jonathan began to find various excuses to spend more time with me, offering to help with errands, suggesting we watch a movie together, or simply hanging out in my room. The most challenging part of it all was that, despite philosophers' smooth terminology within me, I genuinely wanted him there, which only complicated my feelings further. We were in the living room one evening watching a movie. Neither of us was paying any attention to the romantic drama. The scenario had a serene background because of the gloomy lighting and the rain outside. At one point, I laid my head on Jonathan's shoulder, but I can't even recall what caused it. Even though it was such a simple and harmless act, it felt like it went too far. He didn't react. He stayed completely still, silent. But the shift in the air was unmistakable. The strain between us was palpable, hanging in the quiet space like an unspoken truth neither of us dared to acknowledge. "You're making this so difficult," he eventually murmured, his voice barely audible. "What am I making difficult?" I asked, feigning ignorance even though I knew exactly what he meant. "This," he replied, motioning vaguely between us. "Us." "There is no us, Jonathan," I said, stepping back. "There can't be." "Who are you?" "Then why does it feel like there is?" he countered. I had no response. Rather, I rose to my feet, muttered something about being tired, and retreated to my room. I thought that would be the end of it for the night. But I was wrong. A knock came at my door later. "Jonathan, I'm really not in the mood. It's crucial, he cut in, his tone resolute. I hesitated before opening the door. He stepped inside, shutting it firmly behind him. We simply stood there for a while, the atmosphere between us feeling heavy and awkward, almost suffocating. I don't care what anyone else thinks, he said, his gaze locked directly onto mine. What matters to me is what you think and how you feel. I took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. I can't do this, Jonathan, I replied, my voice breaking under the weight of my emotions. It's not just about us. There are consequences to consider. There's our family, our lives, everything we've built together. It's just not fair. Fair doesn't matter, he said, taking a step closer to me, closing the distance between us. I'm not asking you to make any decisions right now. I'm simply asking you to be honest with me. Do you feel it too? His question lingered in the air, demanding an answer that I wasn't prepared to give. Admitting the truth would mean that everything would change, irrevocably. There would be no turning back from that point. But how long could I continue lying to myself and to him? I stood there, frozen in place, with Jonathan's question hanging between us, like a heavy weight I couldn't bear to carry. My heart raced wildly, and every logical thought in my mind screamed at me to say no, to put an end to this once and for all. But despite that, I found myself unable to do so. Jonathan, I began, my voice trembling with uncertainty. I can't. I don't know what to say. That's not an answer, he replied softly, his eyes searching mine for clarity. In that moment, I felt completely exposed, as if he could see straight through to my innermost thoughts and fears. The truth was, deep down, I did sense it. Every moment we spent together, every glance exchanged, and every word spoken. It all felt profoundly different now. But how could I possibly say that out loud? How could I admit to something so fundamentally wrong? Something that had the potential to destroy everything we had built together. I can't do this, I whispered, looking away in an attempt to escape the weight of the moment. You already are, he replied, his voice steady yet filled with an underlying tension. I didn't respond to him. Instead, I turned away, desperate to create some distance between us. Yet even as I moved, I felt him take a step closer, closing the gap that I desperately tried to widen. Please, he said, his voice breaking slightly, revealing his vulnerability. Just be honest with me. I need to know I'm not crazy for feeling this way. I wanted to deny it all. I wanted to tell him he was mistaken, that this was merely a figment of his imagination, all in his head. But the words just wouldn't come out. The silence that hung between us was deafening, and in that moment I realized I couldn't keep pretending any longer. I don't know what I feel, I ultimately admitted, my voice barely audible, trembling with uncertainty. But whatever this is, it can't happen. It's just not right. Jonathan didn't argue with me. Instead, he nodded slowly, his expression a complex mix of heartbreak and understanding that tugged at my heart. I'm not going to push you, he said gently, but I'm here, and I think you know how I truly feel. With those words, he turned and left, leaving me alone with my swirling thoughts and an overwhelming sense of confusion. The following days passed in a haze. I buried myself in work, in anything that could keep my mind occupied. Yet no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop thinking about Jonathan. It didn't help that he wasn't giving me much distance. He kept appearing in small, unexpected ways, bringing me coffee in the mornings, casually sitting beside me at dinner, or brushing against me as he walked by. Every encounter felt deliberate, like he was waiting for me to react, to say or do something. Then there was the notebook. One evening, I noticed a small journal left on the coffee table. At first I assumed it was mine, but when I opened it, I realized it belonged to Jonathan. Inside were sketches, notes, and fragments of poetry, things I never knew he created. But what truly caught my eye was a page near the back. It was about me. He had written about how he saw me, not just as his sister, but as someone he admired, someone who consumed his thoughts. The words were raw, unfiltered, and deeply personal, and they terrified me. I knew I shouldn't have read it. I knew I should have closed the journal and walked away, but I couldn't. Each sentence felt like it was pulling me further into a place I wasn't sure I could find my way out of. That journal altered everything in a way I couldn't have anticipated. It wasn't just vague feelings or fleeting emotions anymore. It was something real, something tangible, written in ink and impossible to ignore. The more I tried to fight it, to push it away, the more it felt like I was losing control of myself, of everything. I spent the entire night staring at that journal, my mind spinning in a million different directions, each thought more confusing than the last. Part of me wanted to confront Jonathan, to demand some kind of explanation, to ask him what this all meant. But another part of me knew exactly what he would say. The words in that journal weren't just about harmless admiration or innocent sibling closeness. They went much deeper than that. They were about longing, about love, feelings that had been creeping into my heart, feelings I hadn't dared to admit, even to myself. And as much as I hated to acknowledge it, those words were a reflection of the emotions I had been trying so desperately to hide for weeks. The following morning I avoided him entirely. I couldn't meet him, not after everything I had read, not after everything I now knew. However, Jonathan wasn't the kind of person you could avoid for long. By the evening, he found me sitting alone in the backyard, staring blankly at the horizon, as if it might offer some kind of answer. "You've been quiet all day," he said softly, sitting down beside me, his presence both comforting and unsettling. "I've just been thinking," I replied, trying to sound casual, even though my heart was pounding in my chest. I hoped he couldn't hear it. "About what?" he asked, his voice cautious, yet filled with curiosity. I hesitated for a moment, my fingers nervously fidgeting with the hem of my sweater, unsure how to start. "I found your journal," I admitted quietly, not daring to meet his eyes. There was a brief, heavy silence between us. Then I heard him exhale sharply, as if a weight had been lifted, but also shifted somewhere else. "I didn't mean for you to see that," he said softly, his voice shifting somewhere else. "I know," I replied, "but I did, and now I'm not sure what to do." "About what?" he asked again, his voice trembling just slightly, betraying his concern. "About us," I said, finally turning my gaze to him. His expression was a mixture of fear and hope, and it tore at my heart to see it. "I don't want to make things harder for you," he said, his words quiet but urgent. "But I can't keep pretending that I don't feel what I feel. I've tried, but it's impossible. I don't know if I can do this, Jonathan," I said, my voice breaking as the words caught in my throat. "It's too much. It's too complicated." "The last of the bishops, Andy, the guy who keeps the bowls, went before Mr. L for merit conviction," Sarah said. "It doesn't have to be," he said, reaching out for my hand, his touch gentle yet insistent. "We don't have to figure everything out right now. I just need to know if you feel the same way." I wanted so desperately to say no, to convince him that this was all the mistake, that we could go back to the way things were before everything had changed. But the words wouldn't come. I couldn't lie anymore. Not to him, not to myself. "Yes," I whispered, barely able to speak the word aloud, "but that doesn't mean it's right." The moment I said it, I knew it had already set something in motion, something I couldn't stop. In the following weeks, Jonathan and I struggled around our emotions, never quite crossing a boundary, but never fully retreating either. Each conversation and shared moment felt precarious, like balancing on a tightrope, one misstep away from disaster. Then came the night that altered everything. It was late, and the house was quiet with everyone else asleep. I was in the kitchen, struggling with insomnia, when Jonathan entered. "You're up late," he remarked, reaching for a glass of water. "Couldn't sleep," I responded, avoiding his eyes. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he placed the glass down and turned toward me. "We need to talk." "About what?" I asked, though deep down I already knew. "About this," he said, motioning between us. "I can't keep pretending everything's okay when it's not. I need to know where we stand." "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "I don't know what to do, Jonathan. Every instinct tells me this is wrong, but I can't stop how I feel." "Then stop fighting it," he urged, stepping closer. "I can't," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "It's too much. It's too risky." "Then let me make it simple," he said, his tone calm and unwavering. "Do you want me to walk away? If that's what you need, I'll do it. I'll leave and never bring this up again. But if you want me to stay..." Jonathan's words left me frozen. He was giving me an escape, but was that really what I wanted? I had to choose, and I knew that whatever decision I made, there would be no turning back. Jonathan's words lingered in the air, weighted with significance. He stood motionless, awaiting my response, his gaze fixed firmly on mine. My chest tightened as though my heart was caught in a vice. This was it, the moment that would alter everything, one way or another. "Jonathan," I began, my voice trembling, "I don't want to lose you, but I don't see how we can make this work without breaking everything apart." His expression softened, though his determination remained steadfast. "I'm not asking for all the answers right now," he said gently. "I'm just asking you to decide. Do you want me to stay or not?" Tears brimmed in my eyes. I wanted to say no, to tell him to leave so we could pretend none of this had ever happened, but deep down, I couldn't bear the thought of losing him. "I don't want you to go," I murmured. For a second, he seemed almost stunned by my words. Then, without hesitation, he stepped closer and pulled me into his arms. It wasn't romantic or suggestive. It was simply reassurance, safety, and understanding. "We'll figure it out," he whispered, "one step at a time." The next few days were an odd blend of relief and anxiety. Jonathan and I grew more cautious around others, acutely aware of how our actions might be interpreted. Yet, we managed to carve out moments where we could speak freely without the suffocating burden of secrecy. However, that fragile peace was short-lived. Secrets have a way of surfacing, and ours was no different. One evening, as Jonathan and I whispered to each other on the back porch, our older cousin Jessica suddenly appeared. We froze, caught off guard and unsure of how much she had overheard. "What's going on here?" she asked, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. "Nothing," I blurted out, far too quickly. Jessica wasn't naive. Her sharp, scrutinizing gaze darted between us, searching for answers. "What are you doing?" "You two have been acting strangely for weeks," she said, her tone skeptical. "Don't tell me it's nothing." Jonathan opened his mouth to speak, but I quickly cut him off. "We've just been spending more time together, that's all," I said, trying to sound as casual as possible. "Yeah, and that's what's weird," Jessica replied, narrowing her eyes. "You two were never this close before, so what changed?" A wave of panic rushed through me. Jessica was the last person I wanted suspecting anything. She was blunt, sharp-eyed, and wasn't afraid to confront people when something seemed off. "Nothing's changed," I said quickly, forcing a laugh that didn't reach my eyes. "We're just getting along better these days." Jessica didn't seem entirely convinced, but thankfully she dropped the subject. For now. Later that evening, Jonathan and I sat in my room, the tension between us almost tangible. "She suspects something," I murmured, my voice barely audible. "We'll deal with it. Jonathan said confidently. How? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. It's already hard enough without someone poking around. What if she figures it out? What if she tells someone? We'll find a way, he replied firmly. But I'm not giving up just because things are getting tough. His resolve was reassuring, but it didn't ease the fear gnawing at me. Jessica wasn't the type to let things slide, and I knew it was only a matter of time before she started digging again. The pressure of our secret was suffocating, and I felt the walls closing in. Jonathan and I had made our decision, but could we withstand the fallout? We've reached the end of today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you found our content engaging, a thumbs up and sharing it with your loved ones would be much appreciated. Make sure to subscribe to Love 30K Stories and turn on the notification bell for updates on our latest videos. Your support is everything to us. Until next time, take care and goodbye.